Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I'm Kathryn. That's Paul because Emily is at her brother's wedding. Congratulations to Emily's family. And we're going to Canada.
Happy to be there, eh?
A, yes, A.
Yes,
Yeah,
eh?
we're back on races that are at times that are good for people who live in the United States.
Especially the
And
West Coast.
and especially the West Coast. I don't have to wake up at 6 a.m. while in the middle of running a summer camp, which, as you can see, I am currently in a classroom that I have stolen because this is my friend's office, but he's not here. So,
And it's summer camp.
and it's summer camp in a classroom. Long story. There was anyway, if you know, you know, and if you don't, it's fine.
That's right.
But I was actually pleasantly surprised that the news did die down after our last race, and of course everything that happened between Max and George, and that we weren't dominated for 2 whole weeks on discourse about that, because I think I mentioned that in our reaction for what was our last race. Spain.
Spain.
Yeah, I think I mentioned in our Spain reaction that I did not want 2 weeks of discourse about Max and George.
Yes, and I think that Max really came to the realization, I think, and it took him a while to calm himself down, that
Mm-hmm.
he was letting his emotions get the best of him, and
Absolutely.
and that doesn't make for good racing, much less quality racing that I think he expects of himself. And that's where I believe he found the error of his ways, and he doesn't have to like what George did, but he has to live with it and understand that he wasn't there at the apex when he needed to be.
Exactly. So fortunately, we can move on until George decides to attempt another feud with Max, as he has continued to do for the last couple of years. Pretty much since he's moved up to Mercedes, he's like, I want to be Max's rival. But fortunately, leading into this weekend in Canada, we have the big news of the week of the 2026 Formula One calendar has been released.
It has. Should we say a prayer now for Imola?
I think we need to say a prayer for Imola. Obviously, the people, who run Imola are like, oh, well, this isn't the end of the story. And obviously, it's not like when a track or a race moves off the calendar, it's like, oh, you're never, ever, ever going to see this again. We've seen over the 75 years of Formula One races that have come off and come on. Zandvoort comes to mind because they raced at Zandvoort in the 80s. And then all of a sudden, these last few years, they've been racing at Zandvoort to take advantage of Max Verstappen's stardom in his home country, and now Zandvoort's leaving again. So it's not like we're losing Imola forever, but we're probably going to be losing Imola for a very long time.
Which is okay with me because as I know you and Emily have talked about, Imola doesn't make for the greatest racing on that, especially on that track where the ability to draft and pass seems like an oxymoron.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where yes, we got a very intriguing Imola race this year, but like we said in that reaction episode, that didn't mean that there's a justification to keep it on the calendar. It was just that we got an intriguing race because of what happened in and around it, which we have a recap for linked above. So that's separate from the fact that Formula One did need to move on from Imola, and they're doing it in a kind of interesting way, and that also magically features 2 races in Spain, which I think is one of the really interesting highlights.
I agree. It could be a very, this Madrid, which I believe is going to be a street race.
It's a partial street race, partial permanent through Madrid. They're calling it the Madring or the
Yes.
Mad Ring,
Mhm.
which still don't love, but it's going to be interesting. It's taking the spot on the calendar, but we're going to be in Madrid. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? We're not going to be going to Madrid until September.
Mhm.
So it's the Imola date, which was typically in the spring, but they shuffled things around because they're moving Canada. They're pairing Canada and Miami together, so we don't have what we're having this year. Which last year, when this year's schedule was released, we are like, why are we going to the States, going to Europe, going back to Canada, going back to Europe? So they're working on that regionalization.
which I think is very good from an economic perspective. It makes a heck of a lot more sense. Now, what I think is really also interesting about the 2026 calendar is if you start, a week earlier, which they are in Australia, you're going to run into some weather.
Yes. Absolutely. We have seen how weather has impacted some of the earlier races. Australia comes to mind. Poor Isaac Hadjar, but obviously he's
Yeah.
recovered from that. But it,
Yes.
it will give you some really interesting weather considerations in Australia, China, Japan, which are the races that we're going to be going to before we hit our first Middle East races because of Ramadan once again, which is why
Mhm.
Australia has moved this year to be the opener and is going to probably continue to be the opener as long as Ramadan conflicts with the beginning of the Formula One season.
I would agree with that. It makes absolute sense, and is I think the FIA is being very respectful, for the for that holy period, uh, to make sure that it works out properly. Now, Canada's race in 2026 gets a little interesting. I mean, it's the same day as the Coca-Cola 500 in NASCAR. My gosh.
It's and we talked about this before we started recording. It's actually going to be really interesting this year because typically we have had Monaco pairing with the Indy 500 on the same day, which because it's a European race, it means that the people in the United States are going to be waking up early, 6 a.m. on the West Coast to watch Monaco, take a nap, and then watch the Indy 500. But this year, the Indy 500 and the Canadian Grand Prix will basically be raced at the same time. There will be at least a couple hours of overlap, especially if you have weird weather considerations in either country.
That is true, and especially if you consider this year, the Indianapolis 500 was delayed by a good 35 minutes because of weather, and it was just light rain on the track, but weather in the vicinity that made a significant difference, and actually, if I remember correctly, stopped the race after a few laps.
Yeah, and I think it was even delayed further in 2024 where it
Hmm.
was like for most it was delayed for most of the day and they didn't actually get the race in until the evening because I'm pretty sure I woke up, watched Monaco, took a nap, recorded our reaction episode with Emily, and then watched the Indy 500.
Doesn't surprise me at all.
Other interesting thing is that we will have Monaco will now overlap with the 24 hours of Le Mans, which is happening this weekend this year with
Mhm.
alongside Canada. And obviously the big question was Felipe Drugovich, who had been planning on driving in Le Mans, was he going to be able to do so this weekend because of everything else going on at Aston Martin? Fortunately for him, the answer is yes, he will be able to race at Le Mans. But it's interesting that they talked last year about changing it so that the Indy 500 and Monaco were not on the same weekend and just how important it was to separate them. And obviously Canada isn't as big a race, but it's still a race. It's still, a big portion of the international motorsport community is going to have to decide to, get a second screen.
Yeah. Well, and let's think about it from a geographic standpoint, where you have, Montreal is relatively close in proximity to Indianapolis
Generally,
compared.
yes.
So, that closeness, could draw. It probably won't, but it has the potential to draw fans away from one or the other if someone, has to flip a coin and say, am I going to the Canadian Grand Prix? Am I going to the Indianapolis 500? You know, which do I want to see more?
Yeah, I think it will be for people physically attending the races. I do think it won't be as much of a consideration, but I do think that most people aren't like you and me who if we watch sports, we will watch a sporting event on our television, on our secondary screen, on our phone, on our computer all at the same time. Like same.
Mhm.
So that's something that we would do that I do think maybe most people aren't as ridiculous as we are, and they will choose one or the other, which could just affect overall viewing numbers. And that is a huge factor when it comes to the marketing and sponsorship success of these events, is
Right.
how many eyes are on these screens.
Exactly. No, I agree with you. And with the addition of Madrid as a second race to Barcelona, you have the opportunity for Spain to really get in the act, and especially with the new vehicle configurations,
Right.
it's going to be very interesting. We've got a new essentially smaller vehicles. We've got new DRS, which essentially can be used at
Sort
least in
of.
theory, sort of at any time. There aren't DRS zones anymore. I think those are going away.
I believe so. And it's not going to be called DRS. They're basically putting a different hat on it, and it's going to be like a different function in the car, but it's basically the same thing, in
Right.
my
And
opinion.
and I think there's also going to possibly be some additional strategy, especially with fuel to battery consumption, because
Yes.
the batteries are becoming a more prominent part of the hybrid vehicle. And you've got to be able to balance that and be able in the middle of a race to actually recharge said batteries
Right.
while you're on using your gas consumption.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, especially how they frame it, with like not going too much full on Formula E, but going in the direction of more sustainable, and Formula One's overall net zero by 2030 goals is really the whole direction of this upcoming generation of cars, this upcoming generation of the calendar, where they're really focusing on being conscientious about the regionalization, doing things like ending the season with two massively ridiculous triple headers. The first being Cota, Mexico City, Brazil, which we all know is one of the best stretches of the Formula One calendar, but is also the most like challenging. And then the
Mhm.
second one, the last races of the year, is Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. And no one wants to go straight from Vegas to Qatar.
I would agree with that. I mean, I understand why you don't want to put Miami in close proximity to Coda, in close proximity to Las Vegas, because that takes away from the anticipation of that next race in the states. But going from Vegas to Qatar is a significant hop, if you will.
Right. And the other problem, and the reason why you can't have a race like Miami later in the year, is because it's at Hard Rock, and Hard Rock is pretty occupied from August to December, January, if they're lucky, which they're not, because of the NFL team that's their home, the Dolphins, that's their home facility. So you really can't use Hard Rock Stadium 6 months out of the year, because its purpose is the NFL.
Exactly. No, that makes sense. Now, speaking of Le Mans,
Hmm.
from what I understand, there are a number of former Formula F1 drivers who are participating in this year's Le Mans 24 hours.
Yeah, we have a number of them. The total is 19, but I did pick out like a couple notable ones. Nick DeVries, who obviously spent 5 minutes at Racing Bulls. V Carb. No, it was still AlphaTauri,
They're still AlphaTauri.
back when he drove for them. Obviously, the most recent former Formula One driver who's making the hop to Le Mans is Kevin Magnussen, who is still who he left for BMW M Motorsport, and that's who he's going to be racing with. Mick Schumacher will be driving in, I believe, with Alpine. He is currently doing endurance for Alpine. Jenson Button, the 2009 champion, with Braun, which, if you have not watched our reaction to the Braun documentary on Hulu, you can watch that linked above. Then we also have Antonio Giovinazzi, who I think is part of the Ferrari class that is one of the most favored to win this weekend in Le Mans.
Mhm.
And he last won with Ferrari when they returned to the top hyperclass in 2023. And then you also have Robert Kubica, who spent many years on the grid as a driver and a reserve driver and a test driver, and Pietro Fittipaldi, who is part of the entire Fittipaldi family empire in Formula One. And they're all going to be driving this weekend in this fascinating endurance race.
it is an absolutely fascinating race, and there are numerous classes within the 24-hour of Le Mans that, depending on what type of car you're driving, you can actually, win the 24-hour of Le Mans in your classification. So
Hmm.
it's not just one race where if you're the fastest and you get the most laps in, you're going to be the winner. They actually, and I think they do a wonderful job with this. There is all kinds of uh you know opportunities, and it's not only endurance of the vehicle but also of the drivers.
Yeah, like I've been running a summer camp, or I have been running training at a summer camp, and the last 3 days since the staff have started arriving has been exhausting, and we've been doing like 20-hour days. It's a lot, and I'm already tired, and I've already started losing my marbles, and we're on day 3. So I can't imagine what, actually trying to drive a car really fast for 24 hours like these guys do. And obviously they do them in teams. But we have also had a couple current F1 drivers who have raced Le Mans. Obviously, Max Verstappen has said, like, I would love to drive in Le Mans, but I can't right now. And Nico Hulkenberg won with Porsche in 2015, and Fernando Alonso won twice with Toyota in 2018 and 2019 when he took his little Formula One sabbatical before saying, "Hey, I'm back."
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's going to be. I think that if you're a driver, and especially in Europe, the 24 hour of Le Mans is a goal that you want to be able to achieve
right.
at some point in your career, being able to run the race, much less win the race.
Hmm.
And if you have that opportunity, you've got to take it where you can.
Yeah, exactly. And it's why it's brought up so much, like, of the alternative, because there's so many different racing series in the umbrella of international motorsport, in the umbrella of the FIA. And Le Mans comes up so much just because it's such a historic, important race to motorsport. And that's always why drivers are like, Max is like, I would love to team up with Fernando and Yuki and drive in Le Mans. Like, that's, these are other big dreams other than reaching pinnacles of motorsport like Formula One.
Exactly. Now, while we were on our 2 week hiatus here, there was a little bit of hand wringing because of the points that Max Verstappen got on his license for
Yes.
his antics in Spain.
Yeah, it's been interesting, and I wouldn't say it's been overblown, mostly just because, like I said at the beginning of the episode, this did, it faded off a little bit as came into the off week. And really, yes, Max has 11 penalty points, and I didn't actually know when the points were going to fall off when we recorded our reaction episode for Spain, but it turns out that Max does have 2 points of his current 11 scheduled to come off after the Austrian Grand Prix. So we're in Canada, we go to Austria, but Max needs to be clean for 2 races, which is conceivably possible because Max has gotten close to a race ban before, and it's, what if, and then, like, oh, never mind, he's fine, and then we don't even notice when the points start to fall off. But he has 2 that fall off at the end of this month. I believe it's either the 29th or the 30th of June, and then he'll have 2 more points that will fall off once he gets to Mexico. And then I think he also picked up points last year in Cota. So he'll have a lot more points that are going to fall off of his license at the end of the year. It's obviously a matter of not getting more to put on, but he won't be as on the verge at the end of June if he keeps things clean, which he should.
If he keeps his emotions in check, and I know that there is a confluence of having emotions with the vehicle and having emotions in the middle of a race, trying to make sure that you maintain your position. But if you are Max has had a long history of being very level headed. You don't get 4 world championships without being level headed,
Yeah.
and being able to drive your car as well as you possibly can. So I'm erring on the side of caution, but I would say that there is a good opportunity for Max to ride through this without a scratch, if you will.
Yeah, and before we speak to the contingencies in case this does happen, to speak to the level-headedness, I'm sure some people would be like, "Is he though?" But the thing is yes, obviously racing against Lewis and racing against George, sometimes he gets a little dicey racing against Lando. But I think that what gets a little bit forgotten is the fact that Max does get very spicy on the radio with GP, his race
Mhm.
engineer, but that is the appropriate outlet and that is the appropriate place to be spicy and to yell and tell GP to not talk to him when he's in the middle of braking instead of doing something like tangling with George, putting his car on top of Lewis's halo, etc., etc. So Max will do what Max does, and if he has a race ban in his future, Red Bull has some very interesting contingencies that not only speak to obviously what they're going to do if Max is unavailable to race and spend another week at home with the baby, but it also speaks to the future for when Max eventually decides to retire, which could be any time from tomorrow when you're listening to this, unlikely, to the end of his contract in 2028, which he has said multiple times that that is when he will leave Red Bull or when he would be available and open to leaving Red Bull. We'll see about that. We'll see if he gets there. And of course, a bunch of us assume that once he's done with this contract, he will go and be a professional sim racer for the rest of his life and do endurance and all the fun stuff that he wants to do.
Right. And that's true. Now, with that in mind, let's take the other side of the coin and be the contrarian. What happens if Max does get another point on his license and has to sit out one race?
Well, the easy answer, or at least the part one of the answer, which is the easy answer, is Isaac Hadjar races in Max's car in the Red Bull. That's the answer. I believe Red Bull has already come out and said that if Max is unavailable for race ban reasons, or I'm assuming any other reason, it's going to be Hadjar, which makes sense, which is exactly what I said in the Spanish Grand Prix reaction. But it makes sense because he is the most exciting up and coming junior driver that they have. And he's already shown to be very capable. He's beating out Red Bull drivers. He's beat out Yuki and Liam multiple times when they were driving in the Red Bull in his racing bulls. So Isaac Hadjar is like there's very little question that he is going to go. And obviously there's discourse of like staying with Red Bull, going to Red Bull will ruin his career, but it's like, no, it won't.
Oh, and that's very true. I mean, if you're trying to create this imaginary quote unquote curse of the second Red Bull seat, that really doesn't play very well in my mind because
We've
these
been
are
watching sports for too long.
yes, where this is all very competitive, and you just have to, you've either got to perform or the next person in line uh, takes over. So let's say that Isaac does get into Max's seat for a race. What happens at VCARB?
So that's actually been very interesting to me because obviously right now the Red Bull and VCARB Racing Bulls reserve driver is Ayumu Uwasa, the Japanese driver who has done a bunch of FP1s before. But Helmut Marko has said in the past that among other things, Iwasa needs to beef up his backing and his marketability and get his name out there a little bit more, which he's very well known in Asia but less so internationally. And but I didn't think that that would stop him from being a sub all the way until Red Bull petitioned the FIA to ask for an exemption and for a super license for Arvid Lindblad.
And this is really very interesting because it has all of the similarities. And if you happen to see the great Netflix documentary, The Seat,
Which I'm in.
which Kathryn is in with Emily, of course. Uh, Great first 10 minutes of any documentary I've ever seen.
Thanks.
I'm not biased.
Not at
Uh,
all.
yes, but this has some remnants of what Mercedes did with Kimi Antonelli.
There are definite shades. Kimi Antonelli has a much stronger junior series background prior to F3 and F2 compared to Lindblad, but Lindblad is Red Bull's answer to Antonelli. He was third in Italian F4 in 2023, fourth in Formula 3 last season. He won the Formula Regional Oceania Championship in 2025 and is currently third in the F2 Championship with 2 wins and a P2 in the Imola Sprint. And his win in the Jeddah Sprint made him the youngest race winner in F2 history.
I mean, he has definitely shown potential to be a Formula One driver.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's the writing on the wall that we will see him in the Red Bull seat, probably not this season for free practices, but possibly next season. He'll probably do another season in F2. Doubtful that he's going to be going anywhere towards F1 with the seats kind of locked up as they are, unless Yuki decides to pull a runner after this season and go elsewhere, which could throw a very interesting wrench into things. But Lindblad is definitely the future of Red Bull racing. He's turning 18 in August, so there's really not a long time for this exemption, which was also talked about last year when Mercedes petitioned for Kimi Antonelli to have an exemption, which I think Antonelli's birthday is also in August. So it's really just a couple months, few weeks in case they need him in the car before he's legally old enough, because the minimum age of 18 is the Max Verstappen rule.
Yes, that is quite true. Now,
Yeah.
for all of those fans of the reserve driver Owasu, I think you can expect him to probably be in one of the seats in FP1 in Japan. So you'll get to see him.
Yeah, I mean he'll stick around. It really will be a question of how ready is Lindblad for the reserve driver position, which obviously you can be a reserve driver and still drive in F2. I'm not sure where Iwasa is driving right now. He was driving in Super Formula, which is like Japanese Formula 1. So
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see that, but there could be eventually, I'm sure, like in Red Bull's hopes and dreams, a Yuki Tsunoda, Isaac Hadjar team up at Red Bull after Max decides to retire, and then Lindblad and maybe even Iwasa can be in the V Carb seats.
Yes, yes. That's a distinct possibility.
Yeah,
Uh,
obviously that's a long time out. This is,
yeah.
3-4 years away. But it will be interesting to see if Lindblad is going to start sniffing a Formula One car, if Max, and this is all contingent on Max getting to 12 penalty points, which could be as soon as next week or could not happen at all.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, once you get to 12 penalty points and you sit out your race, your license goes to zero.
Correct. You start back to zero, and that's exactly what happened last year with Kevin Magnussen. And we all joked, "Oh, now he's just going to go, bumper cars for the rest of the season for Haas because he can do whatever he wants now that he's got a clean license."
Yes. Well, I don't see Max doing that
Oh, for sure.
specifically, but it's Formula One is better when Max is racing than when Max is not racing. Even
Obviously.
even when, as you mentioned earlier, when he decided to get onto Lewis's halo, which I believe was 2023,
No, it was 21. It
or
was it
21.
was it was it was the Max versus Lewis season of drama.
Yes, but 2021, that was early on in that race, and you ended up not having Max there. Yes, it becomes a wide open race, but I think that Formula One is better with Max in the seat, in the car, racing to win than not.
Right, and it's basically not the exact same scenario as what happened in Spain in 2016 between Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg. Obviously, they were teammates at the time, and they took each other out in the best car on the track, which was a lot. What words, Kathryn? I'm very tired. What allowed Max to get his maiden win in Formula One because it opened that up. And I mean, Max even beat Sebastian Vettel, who was driving for Ferrari at the time. We have a whole
Right.
reaction episode linked above about the entire season because I watched it all. And I promise I will watch the full 2010 season eventually. But it is definitely one of those things where in 2016 racing was more exciting when Lewis and Nico were driving
Right.
rather than when they were fighting with each other in the team motorhome. And it's the same thing, like Formula One is better when Max is there because you don't know what Max is going to do compared to Max just sitting at home with the baby, sim racing.
Right. No, exactly. Now, speaking of drivers making a nuisance of themselves in the garage, let's get on to the Canadian Grand Prix and our dear friend, Lance Stroll.
Yeah, so there has been a lot of speculation, gossip, rumors about what really led to Lance's inability to race in Spain. Obviously, the overarching, what we do know that is probably true, that is true, is that Lance had a setback with the surgery he had had going into 2023 with the surgery he needed after he broke his wrist. And there have been some rumors about potentially a temper tantrum or some things flung or punches thrown at walls that may or may not have happened that they will obviously never cop to. But it did lead to the question of, is Lance Stroll going to be ready for Canada, his home race in front of his family?
Correct. Yes. And Lance has gotten his clearance.
Mhm.
So we will be seeing Lance there. And, you know, when you have a physical impairment, obviously you're using your hands, at all the time racing a vehicle.
Like if
Um,
you're a musician, you probably shouldn't play basketball and jam your fingers.
and especially if you're playing guitar.
Yeah.
But yes, but we won't go there. But yes, if you use your hands for specific purposes, whether you are a musician or a driver, you can be very frustrated.
And obviously, he has had access to the best doctors available in the world and the cutting edge of medical technology and everything like that. So there really was like, if somebody is going to be ready to recover in a short amount of time, then it's going to be someone with that access through Formula One in general, and also that access through the fact that Lawrence Stroll has a lot of money.
Yes, that is true. But not everyone will recover like Carlos did from his appendicitis.
Absolutely. Carlos and his appendicitis, Alex Albon and his appendicitis, like the setbacks that Danny Ricciardo had when he broke his hand in 2023,
Right,
that
right.
led to a lot of chaos in that car. And that did take him like the full, it's like, it'll be 4 to 6 weeks. Well, it took the full 6 for him to be ready to get back in the car. So the fact that Lance is going to be ready, obviously, while yes, Aston Martin is having a washout kind of season, Lance still has 95% of their points.
Exactly. No. That's very true. So, you know, I think we can easily say here that to wish Felipe Dragovich well on his 24-hour Le Mans run and I think he's driving for Cadillac. Uh,
Yes.
but this, he can worry about Formula One, sometime next year or later in the season. Now, as we get into our Canadian Grand Prix and predictions, what happened last year, Kathryn?
Honestly, I don't really remember much about the race last year. I think I was getting ready to lead a hike that morning. I did have it on my iPad in my hand, but it was a Max win, a Lando P2 and a George Russell P3. What was interesting about the qualifying more so than the race, which clearly I don't remember all that much of, though I'll link the reaction episode above because we did react to it. But Max and George qualified with identical times. George got pole position over Max because he set the time first, which if you do set an identical time, the rule that they have established for fairness is if you set it first, you get that time and you get that placement. And that was only only the second time since Formula One adopted the 3 decimal timing, system, going out to tens, hundreds, thousandths of a second, which is a three-way tie between Jacques Villeneuve, Michael Schumacher, and Heinz Harald Fronson. So it's not very common. We've seen it a few times this year, especially with like Max and George setting identical times in like practices or like early qualifying sessions. But for like when the real qualifying pole time mattered, it's only happened twice since.
And I've seen that that qualifying from 1997, and it's just insane because you have three drivers who drove exactly the same uh, race times, and I think two of them were on different tires.
Right, because it was the era of tire wars.
It was the tire war. It was during the tire war. So it was just, because I think two were on Bridgestone and one was on Pirelli. But just unbelievable. I mean, it is a statistical anomaly.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm seeing if they have the tires. They do have the tire classification. Villeneuve was a good year. Franson was Goodyear, and Schumacher was. Oh no, they were all on Goodyear.
Oh, they were
It
all
was
okay.
Goodyear versus Bridgestone, but they were all on Goodyear.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's a good stat. I like that.
That is very interesting. The
Yeah.
tire war era is so fascinating. It's something that will never happen again unless something really weird happens, if Pirelli decides to break away. But the fact that that was another additional consideration other than soft medium versus soft versus medium versus hard. That was a very interesting era of Formula One.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's get into some predictions, shall we?
Let's dive into predictions. Obviously, Paul here as guest is going to be our guest picker for the week. If you want to join us as guest picker, don't forget to DM your podium predictions or all your pole, podium, and P10 predictions to us on Instagram at going.off.track. And we do for Emily and I, and Emily did submit her predictions while dealing with airport fun and canceled flights, but we do pole, podium, and P10. So for pole position, who do you have?
I have Max
Okay,
because I still believe that Max on a single lap on soft tires is still probably one of the best drivers in the business.
absolutely. He's definitely up there. It'll be interesting to see how the Red Bull does, what kind of upgrades they're going to be bringing, which I haven't even looked yet. But Emily and I both did pick Oscar. It feels like right now qualifying, and I'm speaking for her, but I don't think I'm wrong, but it does feel like qualifying right now is a toss up between Oscar and Lando. And when Oscar does the lap correctly, he is leagues ahead of most
I
of the grid and most importantly of his teammate.
and I would agree with that. It's Oscar is a very fair pole sitter, and he's done very well, and he has demonstrated that he should be at the front. You know,
Exactly.
with especially with the quality that McLaren has brought to the grid.
Exactly. So, who is your podium for this weekend?
Yes. For this weekend, I am looking at Oscar, Max, and Charles
Okay. So you
because
think that the Leclerc side of the Ferrari garage is going to be okay this weekend?
yes, I think that my thought is Lando fourth, and I'm I'll surprise you later, but I think that Red Bull will be double points this week.
Okay. All right. So I think this has been like one of my mainstays. It's like back in the day, it was Hamilton, Bottas, Verstappen. Now it's Oscar, Lando, Max, which is what I went with. And then Emily is also going with you with good things coming out of the Leclerc side of the Ferrari garage. She is going with Oscar, Lando, Charles.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I think that Charles has shown moments of brilliance
Mm-hmm.
when Ferrari gets it right.
Correct. He's really I believe he's really been impressive, especially considering he was the favored Ferrari driver back when it was him and Carlos, and Carlos really was the more capable, better driver, which you've seen with what he's been pulling out over at Williams now. So it'll
Yeah.
be very interesting. And then moving on to P10, who is your pick for P10 this week?
My P10 is Fernando Alonso.
Okay, so you think he's going to maintain the Aston Martin's ability to sit in the lower point scoring positions?
Exactly.
He was P9. Yeah, he was P9 last week
Last week.
because of
Yes.
Max's
I
little
think there
oopsie.
is I'm expecting a trend to continue.
That would be nice. And then I went with Yuki in the sense of Yuki needs to get back. Like if Yuki is going to be, it's going to become a challenge. I'm not going to say problem. It's going to be a challenge if Yuki doesn't start getting himself into those lower point scoring positions before the summer break, because at the very least, then he can start getting into the midpoint of the points positions after the summer break. Like
Right.
let's make this go progress. And then Emily is throwing Lance Stroll a bone for his triumphant return at his home race and with with the groundhogs and in front of his father on Father's Day, and she is going with Lance Stroll.
And I think that's very generous of Emily. We will see what transpires. And who is well moving right along? Who is your biggest surprise?
My
Going
biggest surprise is that we're going to see double points out of Racing Bulls, which means points for Hadjar and points for Liam Lawson. I think that we might be seeing a turning point for Lawson. Obviously, he got a little bit lucky the last time he ended up in the points, but we could be on a better trend for both V Carb drivers, and I'm looking forward to that.
And I think that's a distinct possibility. My big surprise is Yuki getting back into the points. I'm picking him actually P7
Okay,
uh, because I think that if as he starts to figure things out, he's been getting more consistent as well.
that is true. So let's hope that for the sake of Red Bull, let's hope that trend continues. And then who is going to do your dumb of the weekend in Canada?
Well, I've already given positive vibes to Fernando, and it would be very easy to pick Aston Martin as the answer because of what's going on with Lance. But I'm going to go with Lewis and Ferrari. He's due to regress a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, because it's very interesting that like Lewis's worst Ferrari races are still great races for like half the grid.
Right. Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And mine is that the Alpine disaster is going to continue. I don't think, for better or for worse, I don't think that Flavio Briatore is seeing what he wants out of Franco Colapinto, which we all want to see Franco do well. Do we want to see Franco do well wearing a different team's overalls? Probably, just because of everything happening over at Alpine. But I do think that they were not great in Spain, and I do think that that trend is going to continue, which is continues to be karmic retribution, but what do I know?
Flavio is going to be Flavio is going to be Flavio, and leopards don't change their spots.
I don't know what you mean. He didn't cheat. Of course not. It was all alleged.
Allegedly. So
Yeah.
yes, but
But that's what we've got for the Formula One side. F1 Academy is back in action in their monthly reappearance as a support race. We're very excited to see them. They just had the debut a couple weeks ago of the Netflix documentary that we've been talking about for a year. F1 The Academy is live on Netflix. As I have been at camp, I have not had a chance to watch it yet, but Emily and I will at some point do an episode on it. It's what I have seen so far has been really interesting, especially they've been able to discuss the kind of disparity in the backgrounds of these drivers and their families, and drivers who, like, say, Formula One drivers, where you have the working class families of the Ocons and the Hamiltons, and then you have the driving legacy of, say, a Verstappen, of a Schumacher, of a Stroll, who comes in with so much financial backing. And so you see a lot of the different backgrounds, and they've been showing off a lot of the drivers so far. So I'm very excited to see more of that once I have 5 minutes to not prepare for running a summer camp for the next 2 months.
exactly. No, and I think that the people who are producing these F1 documentaries are doing a very good job of bringing a human face to these drivers. but really giving people their background and how they have, how they have been brought up, why they have this drive to race and win and succeed and drive fast.
Right.
uh, because it doesn't it's it's not everybody who wants to do this. And when you are driving, you know I believe that every F1 Academy member's goal is to be an F1 driver. No
Hmm.
question. No
Right.
question. They want to be on that grid.
Absolutely. 100%. Now, is it enough to just be a pioneer and lay the foundation for the future female F1 driver? Yes and no. I do think that right now it is a little too early and a little too soon. I think that it will take bringing more gender equity to the lower series before we start seeing, Formula One drivers or female Formula One drivers, or even female reserve drivers, or just even FP1 drivers. But we've had a number of female drivers in F3, which is kind of the closest that we've gotten in a while under the current structure of the support series, because it wasn't always F3, F2, F1. There was, Formula 3000 and other organizations were different paths, and say what Susie Wolf took when she ended up becoming the, test reserve driver for Williams, which, speaking of our favorite managing director of F1 Academy, she is releasing a biography.
Wow. I did not. I see that. And just I so she's a fascinating person, and she's really been on the front lines of the F1 world for a number of years, albeit,
Right.
starting behind the scenes, but really showing her leadership uh, with bringing the F1 Academy to the fore. That really, I think is very positive for Formula One itself and for the FIA for that matter. Now,
Absolutely. And the FIA needs all the good press that it can get.
absolutely right. Now, I believe that in Montreal, because of the weather in Miami, there's going to be 3 races this weekend.
Yes, there will be 3 races, two on Saturday, one on Sunday. They will, because we missed the race that offered the full Grand Prix points. There will be 2 full Grand Prix points, and then one race 2 will be sprint race points, which I've talked about before when we've talked about the F1 Academy, that I love that they have the reverse grid race for race 2/race 1, typical on a typical 2 race weekend. But my problem is the races are still the same length.
You can't have everything. Where would you
But
put
I
it?
want it. I want
Yeah,
everything.
right.
So yeah, like I'll get over it. Or the system that they have this year is still much better than last year, especially last year's qualifying system. So at least we have that. And they're going to be racing on a brand new circuit in Canada. This is the 14th circuit that they've had on the F1 Academy calendar. This is the third year of F1 Academy, second year that it has more national recognition. So that will bring an interesting kind of clean slate situation, and could potentially give other drivers opportunities to stand out this weekend in these 3 races.
It should be some very exciting racing for the F1 Academy. Now, who's going to be the wild card entry for Canada for this weekend?
That's a great question, because we have High Tech GP's driver Nicole Haverda. She's a full-time driver with High Tech and with F1 Academy. This is going to be her home race, and I think her first home race at this level. But they have not yet announced, and it's Wednesday as we record this, they haven't announced if there's going to be a wildcard driver, which is interesting because I think they are scheduled to have a wildcard driver in each race this year, because they have that open seat in that third seat at High Tech. So lots of question marks. Very curious to see who is going to end up taking that third High Tech seat.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I think that Harvda's got a great opportunity here because she is not currently in that horse race for the championship. Uh,
Right.
and especially the points that they get when they do the reverse grid. I think that creates some great opportunities for all the drivers.
Yeah, it not only does it give a lot more opportunity for the drivers who typically qualify, closer to the middle, and gives you a lot more of a it really makes it so you want to qualify as close to, P8, P10 as possible to get yourself in the position to be at the top of the reverse grid, and gives you a dark horse opportunity to get points. Ella Lloyd is a driver that stands out from the reverse grid winner from the second race weekend of the season, I believe. So it doesn't give you the big points haul as it would if you qualify near the top, but it does give more people opportunities to get podiums, which gives you more recognition, and then also leads you to building up your position and building your confidence. A lot of these drivers are brand new to open wheel single seater racing, so the more that they could get this confidence that they're not just racing in the back and trying to race for P12, the better off they're all going to be.
Sounds like a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Now, what is the current standings for the championship in the F1 Academy?
So it's very tight right now. It's even tighter than it is in regular Formula 1. Maya Vug, who is the Ferrari driver, she has 64 points ahead of Dorian Pond from Mercedes. She has 63. So they're going to be going at it to see who's going to come out of this weekend on top of the championship. We could have a completely different top four by the end of this weekend just by virtue of all the points that are going to get thrown out. And then
Hmm.
P3 is Chloe Chambers. She has 55 points. So the top three are pretty close. And then 11 points back of Chambers, you have Alicia Pomolsky. Chambers and Pomolsky both drive for Red Bulls. One is Red Bull Academy and one is Red Bull Ford. Chambers is Red Bull Ford. And those are really the top drivers that we're seeing. Fortunately, we're seeing a lot tighter of a championship than we were, say, a year ago, where Abby Pulling was just wrecking everything left, right,
Ran
and
away with.
center. And Vug and Pon were doing what they could to keep pace. But I think we really do right now, going into what is this, the fourth race weekend for the Academy, we really have four viable contenders for the championship. A ton of points still available from this weekend through to the end of the season in Vegas. So it's really anybody's game. And we could see a surprise winner out of this top group, or we could see somebody that we haven't even seen yet.
And that's what I'm banking on. I think that the amount of points that are available out there will create some very interesting strategies for these drivers as they get through these races.
Exactly.
So, and thinking about some final thoughts for Canada, uh, any weather issues?
Great question. I don't know. Montreal weather. No, it's not supposed to rain until Sunday at this point, and it's not even a lot of rain for on or not Sunday. It's supposed to rain Monday, so there really is no weather considerations. I think we're just gonna have a straight up solid race weekend. Everyone's just gonna have to get it done on the track with that, and hopefully they keep things clean. Maybe we'll see Mylander in the safety car. We probably will, but it won't be a weather impacted race.
Very good, very good. Well, I'm looking forward to the race in Canada in Montreal. It's a beautiful race. It's really going to be a lot of fun and should be some very, very good driving.
Yes, and don't forget the groundhogs.
Oh, of course, can't forget the groundhogs.
Yeah. So there will be groundhogs. Probably you'll probably see a groundhog or two sighting during the free practices. It tends to be when they come out, and that always just leads to some entertainment on the social media. As always, we will be on the social media on our Instagram account, going.off.track. Don't forget to send us your podium picks for Canada. We might also feature them along with our current guest picker of the week. And yeah, we will see you up next on Monday. We will have our Canadian Grand Prix reaction. Thanks for going off track with us, guys.
Have fun.